it is a game. It's supposed to be fun. I wish I would have enjoyed myself a little bit more. And then realizing how quickly time goes by. I think about those hours that days that Ben and I have spent in and around the facility and in and around people that I haven't seen in a decent amount of chunk of time here. But just being able to be a little more present and in the moment and realize that, we live one life. We only get one opportunity at this. Enjoy the process a little bit more. That'd be my biggest takeaway.
Welcome to the Parenting Athletic Kids podcast. My name is Travis Rogers. I'm a mental performance coach and the father of two athletic boys. Through this podcast, I hope to deliver actionable strategies that you can implement to help your son or daughter optimize their personal and athletic growth. I also hope these conversations help you enjoy the ride. Today's guests are Ben Weber and Josh Kirchhoff. Ben is a pitcher at Xavier University and Josh is a pitcher at the University of Missouri. Ben and Josh reflect on their process through youth sports and how their parents helped them along the way. Here we go. Welcome to the Parenting Athletic Kids podcast. We're lucky enough to have two of my pals on the podcast this go around, two Division I pitchers that have great stories. If you go back and watch, I had their parents on the podcast, so you can go back and check that out and get the parent view. Now we're getting the player view from these two, Ben Weber, Josh. Welcome to the podcast. Ben, let's start with you. Let's jump in. Where are you at? What are you up to right now?
Yeah, I'm a junior right-handed pitcher at Xavier University here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I spent the last 2 years at the Air Force Academy and then transferred here for my junior year.
Love it. Josh.
Yeah, I am a junior right-handed pitcher at the University of Missouri. I spent the last 2 years at Iowa Central Community College.
Awesome. We'll get into that. The switches for both of you. I hope at some point going from Air Force and JC and making those changes and that whole process. Let's jump right in. Ben, tell us about. I want you guys to go back as far as you can remember, and walk us through your youth sports, different sports you played, when you started, back as far as you can remember, Ben.
Yeah, I guess the earliest sport I remember was like T-ball. I think my dad kind of botched my age on the sign-up card, and I was doing T-ball at 2 instead of 4 years old. So that's the earliest one that I can remember. But just kind of growing up with baseball, basketball was a big part of our lives as well, all the way through 8th grade. And then a little bit of the soccer mixed in there, the football, but those weren't the two big players were basketball and baseball for me all the way up through middle school. And then made the decision after my 7th grade year that I was going to focus more on baseball because that was really what I wanted to do.
Tell me about that before we hop over to Josh. Like, what was it about baseball? Were you better at baseball? Were you friends in baseball? What was that decision at that point kind of led to that?
I guess most of my friends were in baseball, but really wasn't great at either sport. Kind of like a fringe player, didn't really quit basketball when I was 5'2", so not really the best that way. But no, baseball was just kind of, I was always interested in it because I always thought it was the sport that it felt the best to succeed in. It was hard, it was challenging, and on a consistent basis, it was just okay, if I had a really good day, I'd have the best feeling in the world. And then you kind of have a few rough ones, but you kind of just chase that feeling of success. And I felt like in baseball, it was the most rewarding feeling that I got.
Awesome. Josh, walk us through your youth sports experience.
Yeah, I can't say my parents bought their sign-up card. I definitely wasn't playing T-ball at 2 years old. But I started playing T-ball, like Ben said, and my parents were big proponents of trying everything at least once. So I played a multitude of different sports, but the ones that stuck for me were baseball, basketball, and then cross country. So I played all of those up through middle school, and then played basketball my freshman year of high school, and then made the switch to being a unicorn or a one-trick pony, as Ben likes to say, and just playing baseball sophomore year through now, I guess. But yeah.
What was that decision like for you? Same kinds of things, or was it something different that drove that decision to just go baseball?
It was a little different for me. I always liked baseball the best. I wasn't necessarily good at the sport, like Ben was mentioning, but I enjoyed the process of baseball a lot. And like you mentioned, the friendships that I made in baseball were a lot stronger than the ones I made in the other sports. So baseball was always my favorite to practice and then as well play in. And then deciding that I didn't have enough time in the day to pursue all those sports to the fullest extent, and made the switch to going.
Love it. Josh, we'll stick with you. Was there any parent pressure to just do one or to just do baseball, or was that a conversation, or just basically you showed up one day and said, I want to do baseball? What was that like?
It was a little bit in the other way. They were a little bit hesitant to allow me to go all in on one sport. I fear that they might have thought I was going to burn out a little bit, which is a valid concern. But I remember Ben and I had a conversation with Josh Kirchhoff, our sophomore year of high school, around September. So before basketball season had started and kind of in the middle of fall ball. And he had asked us what our ultimate goal of baseball, like out of baseball, was. And at the time, we were both scrawny, sub 6 foot white guys trying to play baseball. And we both said Division I baseball. And we kind of had a come to Jesus moment. And on that, if we wanted that to happen, we had to make some changes. And one of the big ones was eliminating basketball for me, and going full in on baseball. So that was kind of how that happened. And then having that conversation with my parents was difficult. And not so much as they were like disappointed in me, but more so that they wanted what was best for me and weren't sure that completely going all in on one sport was what was right.
For you, what was that with the parents? Were they on board? Well, do you remember that conversation? What was that like?
Yeah, I remember that conversation because I had to have it a few times, just trying to be like, hey, I really like baseball, like this basketball thing. It's not my deal. I want to play baseball. And talking to my dad was a bigger proponent in terms of like trying to play two sports. Said, okay, just make it through eighth grade, and then you can do what you want. And then he said, like, I started to make sense a little bit as like a 6th, 7th grader. And he's like, oh, okay, like this kid actually really likes the sport. I felt like I'd go to basketball practice and I just dread it all day. Like I couldn't stand it. I didn't really want to be there. The games were still fun. I still had a great time doing that, but the practices were just a drag. And I'd go to baseball practice and all my friends are there. I'm full of energy, flying around. Like that was basically my happy place. So I'd kind of realized like, okay, this is what I want to do. Like basketball's fun, but in terms of how I want to spend my time, it was just in baseball. So once I kind of laid that out and had a better reason than, oh, I just like it better, my parents were really supportive and were like, okay, like we understand you can just play baseball. And that's kind of how.
Love it. Do you guys feel like you have, even at this young, you're talking about 5th, 6th grade, but in 8th grade, like that ability to have those conversations, Ben, with your parents? Like, was that always something that felt comfortable? Like, I mean, even you said at a younger age, you were trying to say, I don't like, basketball. And I get that. Well, this guy can't really form an opinion. But throughout it sounds like you guys both had good connections, able to talk through things with your parents. Ben, was that the case? Did you feel like?
Yeah, it was the case. I mean, I definitely had some growing pains with it. When I was 12 years old, I tried to tell my dad that pitching was stupid and I didn't want to do it anymore. And he kind of threw that one out the window, which I'm still thankful for to this day. But
I bet you are.
It's just like kind of, he allowed me to reason my way through it. Both my parents did, my mom as well, just to reason my way through it and to form my own opinions. Didn't really like force their experience with sports on me. And like, just because back when they played, like, oh yeah, you're just doing everything, like on to the next, they allowed me to kind of reason through things. And as long as I had a solid reason behind what I was doing, it felt like it was a good place and a good support network.
Love it. And Josh, your experience?
Yeah, mine was a little bit later, so I had a little bit more of a ground to stand on. And knowing Ben for a long time, Ben is a very self-aware person, so he was able to have those conversations at such a young age. But yeah, more the same. My parents were very supportive once they understood why I was going through that, right? So having some sort of a reason behind that decision made the decision a lot easier. But yeah, it wasn't hard to have that conversation, but it did take some time for them to understand.
Tell us, Josh, since you mentioned Josh Ketchmark, tell us about him a little bit. I know the three of us know him, but for those out there and like his why you would go to him and talk to him about, and him ask you about your goals. What was he in your life?
Yeah. So Josh Kirk was Ben and I's travel coach since we were 14, I believe 14. So 14 through and the end of high school. And throughout that time, we built a very strong relationship. And he was a proponent of accountability. So accountability to each other, and then accountability to us as a team. So he preached a lot about accountability. So when we had that conversation on what our dream or our ultimate goal of baseball was, he wanted to hold us accountable to that. So when we had that conversation and when we laid out ultimately what our plan was going forward, he made sure to tell us what that would look like. So he didn't want to feed us a pipe dream. But yeah, I want to play divisional baseball. Oh, you have to do 1 hour of hitting a day and you'll get there. Just touch the weight room once or whatever. He made sure we had so ended up being multiple guys on our team, I believe 6 or 7. And what that looked like was we would have accountability meetings at least once a week where we go through like, hey, I'm struggling in this department, or hey, we're going really well for me. I recommend it to others. We had a group chat where we would log our meals and then send big screen recordings of the meals from the week to make sure we're all hitting our nutrition goals. And then just making sure that each of us showed up to our assigned times for practice in the weight room and extracurricular on that.
Love it. So that was, I mean, had to be hugely beneficial for you guys.
Absolutely.
To have somebody kind of orchestrating that, but then putting it out there for you guys to really follow through on it. But you had people supporting you. That's yours. Ben, anything to add? I think Josh covered that pretty good, but anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like everybody needs someone like Catchmark in terms of the honesty. And he would shoot us straight. He would tell us how it is. Like, hey, you're a Division IV baseball player. They're not taking you. So just the honesty and like somebody who's in your corner and believes in you, but is also going to be able to have that conversation and be like, hey, you're not where you need to be. Like, you don't need to be fed some dream that like, hey, you're 82, 84, Oklahoma's all in on you. Like,
Right.
that's not what anybody needs. So just for him to have, he was honest with us, but then he also had this kind of unwavering belief in like that we could do this thing, even though like you look at it and it made no sense. So it's just like that mix of the honesty and the belief was really important. Helped a lot.
Right. That's awesome to have somebody like that in your corner. That's parents, if you can find people like that and coaches like that, or whoever it might be like that outside of yourselves, a lot of times, right? If a parent's kind of trying to push that, it comes off different than a coach or, somebody like that. So that's really cool. When you guys decided, you made this decision, baseball and then Division I, and talk to, besides Josh, we'll start with you, other than this accountability circle with these 6, 7 guys, what other things changed for you at that point?
Yeah, I started to become a lot more self-aware of my habits, more so the negative side than the positive. The positive came along with that. So sleep schedule will be one, nutrition was another, and then being real with time I spent outside of baseball, or maybe not wasted time, but time I could have been spent honing my craft or being around people that would help me achieve what I wanted to achieve. So just becoming more self-aware on those aspects of like, hey, I'm spending a lot of time playing video games, or hey, I'm spending a lot of time outside of baseball or the baseball space when I should be or could be spending more time achieving this ultimate goal of mine. So that became a big part of mine. But then, like I said, just getting around people that had like-minded goals. If you're doing this by yourself, it's going to be really, really challenging. But I was lucky enough to not only have Ben, but have Ian Culver or Brendan Goldman or Caden Wildman, guys that were all like-minded like me and Ben, and had the same goal. And having a support system around you that of your peers, I can't recommend enough.
Well, Ben, anything to fire Josh is covering all the bases. He's leading.
Yeah, I felt like just from like the changes that you obviously, the sacrifices that you have to make to go on that path, like you kind of end up in a spot where you're doing things a little bit different than the rest of your friends or your family. And one thing that my parents did that was awesome was like, you kind of have like, oh, grandma and grandpa, like they're like, what are these kids up to? Like, what's going on? Like, you're doing this. And I remember my grandma telling my grandma that I was eating 4,000 calories a day and like trying to really like on this stuff, and she just being like, oh, like this is terrible, like this kid's gonna die, like I don't even know. But just my parents being supportive and kind of being in my corner and being like, hey, no, like he wants to do this, like this is his thing, and kind of just being super supportive and like helping me be okay with kind of being a weird dude in general, with like developing those kind of habits and doing those kind of things.
The piggyback off Ben real quick there.
Yeah.
The things that we did weren't normal for kids our age, and I think a lot of the kids that ultimately pursue Division I baseball or higher level don't do normal things that are socially acceptable in a sense. So prepare parents in that sense. You're like, we did get socially ostracized to an extent. It wasn't really bad, like we didn't get bullied or anything, but we did get pressured outside of baseball to do maybe not things that were bad, but to spend time with people outside of our group. So that was something that we had to overcome. But like I'm sure Ben would say the same thing, like wouldn't trade it for the world.
How did you guys? So I can see some parents, and I'm thinking that's parents want, if a kid, if my kid says I want to play Division I, that's the path you have to take, right? You have to give up certain things. But some kids will say I want to do that and not have that awareness, and it's frustrating for the parents. How do you think? Maybe it's surrounding yourself with the right people, as you said, having each other, have accountabilities. Are there other things you think that parents? I think what parents think is I got to step in, right? I got to tell Ben, you got to get to the weight room. And that just becomes a bad play on both parties, right? What would you guys say? What led you to make these decisions on your own? And I'm sure there were some days when Steve or Stephanie said, hey, but
Get out.
Yeah. But probably, but not too much from what I know. So what do you guys think about that? How did you take this on, and where did that come from? And how can maybe parents, other than taking it on themselves, help their kids to see the light on this? Dan, your thoughts?
I think just like kids gonna like the first time I said it, you don't really believe it yourself, and you kind of have to have the freedom to kind of fail and go in the wrong direction at certain points, and to have somebody to be like, hey, I recognize that you said this and you're doing these things. And it's not like an immediate, like, oh, he missed a lift or he's eating junk food, something like that. Like, hey, this doesn't align with your goals. But if you see kind of a pattern over a long period of time, just kind of recentering and phrasing it in a different light and being super accusatory or anything like that, where it's like, hey, you said this, you're doing that. Like, what's up with that? It doesn't have to be a conversation like that, but just kind of being like, hey, you said that you wanted this. Are you still serious about it? Like, there's a certain way that you can go about it where it doesn't turn into a screaming match or somebody forcing someone to do something they don't want to do. And that's what I thought was that my parents did that was great, where like I did stupid things where it's like, oh, I'm trying to lift. I'd lift 3 times a day some days. And the next day, like you take 3 days off and you're like, oh, it's fine. But it's not. And you just have to develop those positive habits. And my dad kind of looking at me and being like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on here? It was better than him being like, hey, that's wrong. Don't do that kind of thing.
Awesome. Josh, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was fortunate to say that my parents are always very supportive. I had been to play bad cop a lot, so didn't necessarily need to do that. But they are very much a support system of mine, and would help steer me back on track in a positive, uplifting way. So rather than like coming down to me like, hey, you said you were going to do this, why aren't you doing that? Yada, yada, yada. I'd be like, hey, are you tired? Like, what's going on? Let's fix this and let's get you back in the right direction, as opposed to like coming off as that negative.
Well, do you think it helped? I talked to somebody else in the podcast, and once my kids said, this is what I want to do, we really structured it out, right? A long-term plan. Okay, it's not every day it's going to go like this, but you have to live 3 days a week. And having that, is that a good place to start? And then you have it written out, right? You have something to be accountable for. I think it was Garen Blake's dad who said he wished he had done that a little different. And that was just kind of day by day. And then Tyler said, if I didn't know I had to go lift, it was easy to miss a lift, right? He said he wished he had that mapped out. Do you guys feel like you had that kind of mapped out? Is that something Josh helped with? Is that something you guys took on? Ben, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it was kind of initially before like we had the freedom to drive our cars or anything. It was kind of like our parents just signed us up for these things and they kind of drop you off at the door. You're like, oh, I have Lyft today. But after you get to the point where you're kind of creating that schedule a little more for yourself and you're asking your parents, hey, can I be a part of this? Can I do this kind of stuff? I think it just helps to have, if it's not necessarily a written schedule, I was never like had a written thing like that, but I knew what I had to do in a given week. So like just having one other guy like Josh, who I'd just be like, hey, we have Lyft these days. Like, let's just do it together. That way, like, I think when you have another person who you're accountable to, rather than just a written schedule or anything like that, but that person's a peer, it's a lot more powerful than like somebody in a position of power who doesn't really who's not going to do the lift, but they're just telling you to do it kind of thing.
Yeah. Cool. Josh, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, like Ben said, accountability partners are huge there. It's really easy to miss a 9 a.m. lift if you're going by yourself, but if you're going with someone else or you are entitled to drive that person, it's a lot easier to make it. But I think creating incentives for going to those things. So one, there would be going with your buddies. So Ben and I would throw Saturday morning or go Monday morning before school. And it was time that we got to spend together. Or, we would get dinner afterwards. If we were at Great Lakes for an extended period of time, we would go get food afterwards. So creating little incentives to get you out the door and actually into the facility, I highly recommend.
That's awesome. That's a great idea. Both of you guys were not just POs, like all through high school. Ben, for you, when did that change? Like, what was that decision like when you're like, I'm pitching as my thing? When did that happen, and how was that whole process?
Yeah, I think that happened, like I realized it was my thing as a sophomore in high school, where it was like, oh, okay, like this is what I want to do. This is what I'm better at, whatever it may be. But it kind of just became like something where I remember talking to Catchmark, like having a similar conversation as Josh did, like, hey, it's way easier to be a Division I baseball player if you're a pitcher right now. Like, I look at you swinging the bat, and that's not going to work out, man. Like, if you want to keep doing this, you might have to switch it up. But it was kind of that, and like the weird thing about it was that after I started to focus more on pitching and kind of took the pressure off myself hitting wise, I became a way better hitter. And I think that speaks to like just the pressure that kids put on themselves to succeed. Like most times, especially with how I'm wired and how I know Josh is wired, like we want to do well. And when we don't do well, having somebody else tell us that we did bad, we didn't really need. So once the pressure was off of that, it became a lot easier to be a hitter.
So I think a lot of guys have found that. So that's really cool. I wish there was an easy, like an easy, oh, just don't worry about it, right?
Yeah.
It's not that easy as we know, but I think it's good for parents to understand that. Let's not add extra pressure. Let's try to keep that as limited as possible on either side of the ball, whether you're hitting or pitching. Like how can we reduce that? Josh, how about for you? I mean, you were behind the dish, catching through high school. Was that like at junior college? I think junior college was the first time you were a PO, right?
Yeah.
What was that decision process like for you?
Yeah. So as mentioned, I got the opportunity to catch a lot going through high school. I really enjoyed catching. I wouldn't say I was the greatest defensive catcher, but I could get back there. It got to a point where my hitting wasn't as great as my teammates. So when we were traveling, we were in Atlanta summer before my senior year of high school. And we traveled with like 18 guys or something like that. Only like 3 or 4 pros. I was a catcher. And one of our catchers got hurt. And I would catch most of the games, but they would hit for me. So I would catch and I would get hit for them. And it was kind of like, I didn't really like hitting. I didn't mind it. I went to a small high school, so I hit in high school. But yeah, I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, you can't really be a defensive catcher in college. And I really like the pitching side of things. So I became a pro officially freshman year of college, but So I knew I was going to become a pro. I didn't ever think about trying to make that.
Tell us about your beyond high school. So tell us about the Air Force, and I think really, if you can, describe the work. The sessions in the weight room. Not specifically. You don't have to break them down, but the effort that went into that, and then the decision, if you can walk us through all this, the decision to then transfer to Xavier.
Sure. Yeah, I guess like the workload from the baseball side, I felt like I had a really good base for how college baseball was going to work, just with the structure that we had previously with our workouts and things like that. But the thing that when you show up to college is it's like, oh, I'm the strongest guy. I'm the second strongest guy in these Great Lakes workouts. Like, you get to college and those guys don't care. Like, you're the weakest guy here now. So just kind of catching up in that direction. It was definitely a struggle at first, especially coming out of basic training. Like, you're down 15, 20 pounds and just working back. But the effort level in college, it's not so much like, it's kind of catch up or get out a little bit, which is a little different from the high school thing. I think can be tough for kids making that transition where it's like, oh, like actually now if I miss a lift, like I might just be off the team kind of thing. It's not really a choice anymore in the same sense. But no, like I think just having the solid base that I did in high school made the transition easier in terms of like guys in college that really want to work and really want to get better and improve at baseball. And it becomes an even bigger part of your life, even when you don't think that's possible. Like, it becomes a bigger part of your life when you get to college, and it's like classes are structured around your practice schedule and things like that. But I mean, ultimately for me, I guess going into my decision to leave the Air Force Academy, it was just the opportunity to play professional baseball there. During my freshman year, there was legislation that was signed by Congress that said graduates from service academies could no longer delay their service commitment and get a waiver to play professional sports. So it was kind of something that was out of my hands, happened obviously after I had shown up to school and gone to school there for a semester. So at that point, it kind of put the seed in my mind, like, hey, I don't know, like if there's any chance, I never want to be like, what if? So I actually just talking that through with my family going through my sophomore year a little bit, it became a thing of like, hey, I just never want to have the what if. We would talk about that in terms of getting better. Like, you never want to have the what if I did this, what if I did that. And so I kind of just took that mentality and was like, well, when I'm 45, 50 years old, baseball's over. Like, I want to be able to say that I did everything I could to give myself the best chance to succeed. And so that was ultimately what led to my decision, was just like, I want to try to be a professional baseball player. It's what I've always wanted to do. And so that was really the decision, was I could either put a timeline on my baseball career and have 2 more years and it pretty much be done, or I could give myself the opportunity to move. So that's what I wanted to do.
Josh, before we get to you, Ben, what do you think? Again, I think parents, for the most part, I think, love to hear that. And, he's committing to this and wants to give himself the best chance at his dreams and his goals. But I don't know that every athlete would kind of take that bull by the horns and run with it. And especially having to transfer and start fresh again and all
Sure.
these other things. What do you think has led you to be able to make these commitments? I mean, a commitment to the Air Force, like, that's big time, right? Like, that's not just school and baseball. That's a whole nother. Is that something kind of you felt like you were? I mean, Josh, it's kind of like that's just what Ben does. I know I should think it. And I'm thinking the same thing, but and I'm sure there's some of that, born with certain tricks. Do you think there's things that let's just ask you straight up, like, that your parents have helped, done or not done, that have helped you to form this person that you are? That's a broad question, but
I guess the thing that jumps to mind is just sharing their life experiences and some of the things that that they dealt with in their lives, whether it was sports or just life in general, and maybe some of the things that they've come to regret that they didn't do or didn't take a leap of faith in a certain sense. Like the thing that comes to mind that I really would think about a lot was talking to my dad about when he played basketball in high school. And he really felt like before his senior year of high school, like he really started to work hard, and he's really started to rapidly improve. And he talks about like regretting a little bit that didn't happen sooner. And so having that experience, or just talking to my mom about like kind of going through her life and business and just the lessons that she learned from interacting with a bunch of different people, like the thing that's kind of been pounded into my head is like, you always have an opportunity to go after something. And most times when you don't, you come to regret that. So that was the thing, was just sharing their life experiences with me really drove home the point that like, I'm in control. This is my choice, and these choices are what make my life. And so I have to live with those choices. And so just weighing the options when it came to this decision was, yeah, you got a pretty good life set up for you, or you got the one that you think about 30 years down the road that's like, man, wouldn't that have been awesome? And so just weighing those decisions and their advice with their experiences was what ultimately helped me make that decision.
I think that's really cool. It makes me stop and think about conversations I've had, good ones or bad ones or whatever, with my kids, but they didn't tell you what to do. They talked about their experiences, right? There's a big difference there between them saying, Ben, this is the right thing, or you're doing the wrong thing or whatever. But that's really cool. That allowed you to think through it and process through it. That's awesome. Josh, tell us about junior college and then like what that experience was like, and then now at Missouri.
Yeah. So like Ben mentioned, I decided to pursue baseball to the full extent and go to junior college out of high school. I had some smaller 4 years, mainly D2s, out of high school, and I had that conversation with my parents. And after, ironically, the conversation I had with them sophomore year of high school of stepping away for basketball, it made this conversation a lot easier. At the time, and I think there still is a little stigma around junior college sports. It's not for the people who don't do well at school. I can tell you that. Junior college baseball is a great atmosphere to allow those who can greatly improve in the next 2 years to set themselves up to succeed at the next level. And I was one of those people who needed it. So the ability to fully commit myself to baseball and not necessarily have to worry about the school part as much greatly benefited me. As far as like programming goes at Iowa Central, the practices weren't as crazy as I'm sure they were at Air Force or Ben, but it was a lot more individualistic. So if you were there to work and to get better, you were going to get better. And there was a lot of people at Iowa Central that I found myself in camaraderie with that had like-minded goals, which allowed me to get better. So I spent 2 years at Iowa Central, loved every moment of it, made some great friends, won a lot of baseball games. And then last November, I committed to the University of Missouri. I got on campus here at the end of June, and I've been loving it since then. So, like I mentioned, the schedule's a little bit different. It's pretty much full bore for the moment we get here. We're in 20-hour weeks. This is our last week of fall ball. Then we'll go into a developmental phase. But yeah, we're consistently at the field anywhere from 4 to 5 hours a day, depending on if we have weights or if we have conditioning in the morning. But one thing I stress to my parents after, when they've been asking me how it's going, or other people who have been checking in on me, is the camaraderie in the team that we have here, the people that are here make this place. It is unlike any other place I've ever been. The people I've met and had the pleasure of interacting on a daily basis have made the transition from junior college to the SEC a lot easier.
Love it. Awesome. Well, I got one more question for both of you guys. And then we'll start wrapping her up. Ben, if you could go back on this youth sports experience, maybe start a T-ball at 1 or whatever, like anything you would have done differently, change anything parents could have supported you more in or less in certain things. Any thoughts on that?
I think I guess it depends on the kid, but for me, I've always been somebody who's really hard on myself and expects a lot from myself. And I look back as a college player now and I drive by like, oh, the 12 or 13-year-olds are playing. And I remember playing those games and feeling like it was the World Series. And it's just not. Like you're having fun with your buddies. And I wish I just knew that more often, and it wasn't about that I was the 9-hole hitter and I was going to go 0 for 4 that day. Like, it's okay. You're going to have a good time. And I think having a good time is what allows you to develop the process and the commitment to what you're doing. Because if you don't have that positive experience and then all of a sudden you're like, I want to be really good at this, that's when you get the burnout. And that's when you get the things that are just like, that don't really help anybody. And so I just wish I had a little more fun with it. And from my parents' side, I always thought they did a great job of like, I never had a car ride home where I was like, oh, I'm just going to get yelled at the whole time. I felt like they did such a great job with being gracious with me and kind of just showing me the right direction and allowing me to kind of walk that way. I feel like that's so much more impactful than just being told what to do over and over again, because it allows the kid to create those habits.
I love it. And if you're beating yourself up at those 12, 13-year-old games and you get in the car, like Burnout City, right? Like,
Yeah,
then why would
yeah.
you, like, maybe basketball sounds a little more fun at that point, right? And I think a lot of, in coaching 12 and 13s, like, there's a lot of that. Like, guys are really hard on themselves. So as parents, we don't need to add fuel to that fire. That's when guys do make the decision at 15, 16, when they're starting to put things together, like, this is what I want to do. You guys probably made that decision based on, the conversations you weren't having to have in the car ride home was a big part. So thanks for sharing that. That's big time. Josh, how about you? Any take backs?
Like Ben said, we are playing a game. It is a game. It's supposed to be fun. I wish I would have enjoyed myself a little bit more. And then realizing how quickly time goes by. I think about those days that Ben and I have spent in and around the facility and in and around people that I haven't seen in a decent amount of chunk of time here. But just being able to be a little more present and in the moment and realize that, we live one life. We only get one opportunity at this. Enjoy the process a little bit more. That'd be my biggest takeaway. But like Ben mentioned, in terms of the parenting side of things, my parents have been awesome. They've been unwaveringly supportive of every decision that I've made. Now, a little bit of pushback at first, questioning decision-making, which is always a good thing. But yeah, ultimately supportive. And in terms of that,
Since you guys brought it up, I got one more question. So back to Ben. So now at Division I college, this is what I want to do. Pro. How are you guys navigating what you just talked about? Like, it's still a game. It still needs to be fun. Like, why would you want to do it even at the pro level? Maybe you're just doing it for the money. But you're going to spend some time riding on a bus and getting paid next to nothing. And like, are you guys able to step back at this point and do that? Or is it different now? Ben, what are your thoughts? I mean, now is it like it's a kind of a job? What's that like for you?
I think it's different, but I think it's different in a way that makes it honestly more fun, in terms of like the connection with Josh kind of touched on this, the connection with your teammates, because you're all doing this together. You're making this commitment. And that's the part of it that's so much more fun now, is that all these guys are pushing each other. And when you succeed, it is the greatest thing in the world. Like, you just feel it's something different than you felt when you were a kid, because you're not really pushing like you are now. And so I think that that's something that I find a lot of comfort in now. I don't feel the same, like, kind of, I guess, like daydreamy sense about the game anymore. Like, it's not, oh, like, I'm going to show up to the field today and whatever happens, happens. Like, it's a lot more structured and things matter and there's pressure, but I think that it makes it even more rewarding when you succeed. And so it just becomes a thing of dealing with when you when those failures happen, they're going to feel a lot more important. And so I guess the mindset shift that has helped me a lot is just to focus on my teammates and just doing my job for my teammates. And even when I fail, finding a way to help my teammates or lift my teammates up, that allows me to take the pressure off myself and kind of distribute it through a support system.
It's big time. That's awesome. Josh, your thoughts on it's not 12-year-old ball anymore. You're not going to Dairy Queen after. Maybe there's a Dairy Queen in
there's absolutely been some Dairy Queen. I can tell, and not on campus, but right across from the apartments. There's ice cream involved. No, I try to be a lot more grounded in realizing that first, I only get 2 years here at the most, right? So trying to enjoy each day. There's only a certain amount of Division I baseball players, and then there's only a certain amount of those Division I baseball players in the SEC. So trying to appreciate each day for what it's worth, even if that day sucks, or even if it's a grueling practice day or whatever, and understand that my baseball production doesn't define who I am, right? Like I could have a really bad day on the mound, and when I leave the baseball field, like I'm a person, like I have other things going for me. So trying to be the best version I can on the field, but not letting that stop me from having a life off of that, if that makes any sense. Not trying to be a drain outside of that. Yeah.
No, it makes a ton of sense. That's awesome. Fantastic. You guys killed this thing. Ben, any final thoughts, things you like parents to know, anything to wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, I just think sports is such a great opportunity for kids to really find who they are through adversity and like an artificial environment a little bit. Like nothing really matters that happens on that field. And so finding out who you are through those artificial stressors builds you into a better person, whether you play college baseball or not, or you play any sport. Like it's a great experience that I think everyone should at least try. And I also want to throw in, I'm really proud of Josh. He only name dropped the SEC twice. So the under definitely hit on that.
I had to.
So that's good.
Hey, people know what the Big East is.
I caught a couple of those too. I did. I wasn't counting, but yeah. That's awesome, Ben. Thank you, Josh. Any parting thoughts?
I like Ben said, sports are an incredible environment to be around. You make a lot of lifelong friends and connections that can carry over into the real world. But as far as from a parenting perspective, being supportive is what your kids will remember, right? Like I don't remember my mom getting down on me for going over for giving up a bomb or like anything like that, or I don't remember my dad getting on me for missing a ground ball. Like I don't remember that. I remember them picking me up and uplifting me and supporting me through my decision making. So if I were to leave parents with that, it'd be support your kids.
Thanks so much, you guys. Ben, Josh, really appreciate you guys. Well, the men you've become, obviously the players that you've become and work towards being, but having you on this podcast and hearing you guys being able to process things and work through things just speaks to the Ben that you've become. So really proud of you guys. Thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having us, Travis.
All right, we'll talk to you guys soon. Hang on one second. Okay. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. Please be sure to like, follow, and especially share the podcast. We're trying to spread the word. If you want more information on techniques, tools, strategies that you can use to help your son or daughter, please check out my book, Parenting Athletic Kids. It's available on Amazon. Thanks again, and we'll be back with another podcast really soon.